In this video, I am going to illustrate how to call a copy constructor through an example Java program. Well, I have already covered the concept in the last video, but in this video, I am going to illustrate it with a real Java program. So, what you can do is you can copy the content of the previous slide, that is the content of another class that I have discussed in the last video in your Java IDE, as well as copy the content of this video, that is the content of this my class in your Java IDE, and then run the program to get the output, get some hands-on experience that I'm pretty sure will make the concept of copy constructor more clear. Anyway, so now let me explain the code, what is happening here. So I will just switch between this slide and the previous slide to show the calls and how the functions are passing. So well, let's start. So here actually I have first started with a class called my class, and inside this my class I have a main function from where the program will start executing. Now, as the first line of the main function, I have simply created an object of another class that I have discussed in the last slide, previous slide. So here what I have done, I have created an object of another class called C1, which is basically an entirely new object of another class. And also I have passed the value 10 and 15 to set the var1 and var2 variable of another class. So what will happen is right after this right after this line is executed over here, it will automatically call the another class's parameterized constructor that matches this type of parameters. So what will happen is, let me go to the another class. So once that line is called, it will call this parameterized constructor of another class, and it will pass 10 as user var1, and it will pass 15 as user var2. And what will happen is inside this the C1 objects var1, it will put 10, and inside its var2 it will put 15, like this. So the object have been created in this way by calling this parameterized constructor. So it will look similar in the main function also, after this call and after the parameterized constructor is executed and after the object is created, it will look something similar that I have just wrote in the last slide, that is C1 dot var1 has the value 10 and C1 dot var2 has the value 15 over here. So C1 is created with these values. All right, so now let us check the use of copy constructor. How can I call the copy constructor? And you can see the copy constructor call in this line of code. Here actually what I am doing, I am creating another object of another class C2, which is again an entirely new object of another class, but this time instead of passing 10 and 15, I am passing C1, which is basically an object of the same class. So since I am passing the object of the same class, that is this another class over in here, since I'm passing that, this line, right after this line, what it will do is it will basically call the copy constructor of another class. So let me go back again to the previous slide to show the what is happening. So here actually right after the function call, this time it will call this copy constructor over here. That means this part of the code will be called. So here actually you are passing C1. Instead of C, you are just passing C1 over here. And now whenever you are passing C1 over here, what will happen? All the variables, all the different fields of C1 are now available to in here. So that means this C dot var1, where the content of C is actually C1, this will have the value 10 and the var2 has 15 because C1's var1 is set to 10 and C1's var2 is set to 15. And then what you are doing, you are just assigning, doing a field by field copy. That means you are copying this 10 inside the class level variable var1 over here, and 15 is being copied to the class level variable var2 over here. So what does that mean? That is C2 has its own var1 and var2, and that actually got the value of C1's var1 and var2 respectively. So what will happen here is, after this line of call and after the copy constructor is executed, it will do like C2 dot var1 equals C1 dot var1, because you just copied, equals 10, and C2 dot var2 will get the value 15. So because it is just a field by field copy. So now C1 and C2 are entirely different object, because look, in both the cases you have used new operators, so that means you have created entirely new objects, and each field of C1 have been copied in C2 separately. So they are both different copy of the object. Now, well, how to prove that, well, they are different copy of the object? Well, I'm saying it that, well, C1 and C2 are entirely separate replica, and C2 is an entirely separate replica of C1. But how to prove it? In order to prove that, I have wrote a few more lines of codes, as you can see in here in this part after this copy constructor call. So what I have done is, first I have just printed the value of C2 at this line. So right after the constructor call, of course, the value of C2, I mean the value of each fields of C2 will look like this. The var1 of C2 will print 10 and var2 of C2 will print 15. I have just explained the reason here before it, because it got the values of C1. Now let us create another class which is C3, but this time instead of using this new keyword, I'm just using this assignment operator to copy the content of C1, which is actually not the correct way of doing the things. I am doing it just to show you that it is not correct. So well, so this, as I have mentioned earlier also, it does not involve the copy constructor call, and only here only the reference or the address of the original class C1 is copied. not a separate replica. Okay, so once again, how to prove it? Now, in order to prove that, what I am doing first, I am checking this, taking this C2 under consideration. So what I am doing, I am setting the variables of C2 to an entirely different value, that is from 10 and 15, which it got from C1. I am changing it to 200 and 250. So I am just changing the value of C1 and C2. Now what I am going to do, I am going to test its impact on C1. If the value of C1 is not impacted at all, that means C2 is a different copy, right? So since C2 is dealing with an entirely different copy, entirely different replica, so C1 is not impacted. We can say that with confidence. So what I am doing in order to test the impact on C1, I am printing the var1 and var2's value of C1 over here. And what you will see is that C1's value is not at all impacted after execution of this line. So C1 is still, the var1 of C1 is still 10 and var2 of C1 is still 15. It has not changed at all. So now we can say with full confidence that, well, C2 is an entirely separate replica of C1. Now the second part, just do this C3. We are saying that, well, it is not a separate replica and it is just the address, they are pointing to the same object. I'm saying all these things, but how to prove it? So what I have done here, that C3, I have changed the value of both the variables of C3, that is C3 dot var1 and C3's var2. I have changed it to 3000 and 3500. So C1's value was 10 and 15, and here I have C3's value I have changed from 3000 to 3500. So now what will happen? So after changing, now is again time to test its impact on C1. Now if you try to print the value of C1, I mean the value of var1 and var2 of C1 object, then you will see that the value have been impacted. It took the value what you changed through this C3 object. Although you did not use C1 here, its value have been changed. So var1 of C1 is now 3000 and var2 of C1 is 3500. So as you can see, C1 has changed because C3 is basically not a separate replica of C1 but only the C1's address, and both of them are basically pointing to the same object. So that's the concept of creating an entirely separate replica of an object using a copy constructor. Once again, it is strongly recommended that you copy both the slide, like the content of this my class, as well as the content of the previous slide, that is the content of this another class, both these things in your IDE, and run the program, and that will give you a good hands-on experience and make your concept of copy constructor and how to copy an object more clear.